Brandon Jones will be headed back to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. There is an update on the charter agreement, and wild rumors are circulating about Alex Bowman's future at Hendrick Motorsports. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got quite a few NASCAR stories and other motorsports stories got started today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight on those really quickly. We're just going to take a look at some paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's 2024 Hackett truck scale scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. I like the colors, I like the white, I like the red. Alpha Prime always does a great job under paint schemes. This one's no exception. It looks pretty solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Berry's 2024 Decisely scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. It's great to see him have a new sponsor for the weekend. I like the colors. I think SHR's had some pretty good paint schemes for this weekend. It looks pretty great. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Mark Truex Jr.'s 2024 Auto Owners scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. I love the colors. I think did a really good job. This is to commemorate Mark Truex Jr.'s success with the Auto Owners sponsorship. Of course, he will retire from full-time racing at the end of this year. I think it does look pretty good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Suarez's 2024 Quaker State scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. I love the colors. I think Trackhouse knocked this one out of the park. They look amazing. They look fantastic. Kyle Sykes did a great job on the scheme. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2024 Boost scheme, Oscar Mayer scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. This is an okay scheme in my opinion. There's been some good JTG Doherty racing schemes in the past, and this one's, in my opinion, they're definitely good for sure, but I think it just mixes up too much. We'll see what Ricky Stenhouse Jr. can do, though, this weekend at Atlanta. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Shane Van Gisbergen's 2024 Quad Lock scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. The last time SVG drove this paint scheme, he went to victory lane, I believe, at Portland. I would not be surprised or shocked if he goes to victory lane with the scheme. I think it looks solid. I think it looks credible. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Atlanta Cup race. As it was announced Monday late morning that Bobby Labonte will be given the command for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Bobby Labonte, who was inducted in the Hall of Fame a few years ago, has gone back to work with Joe Gibbs Racing recently and also has had a lot of success at Atlanta Motor Speedway through his NASCAR Cup career. This probably was the best track that Bobby Labonte ever ran. He won here like 4 or 5 times, including back in 2003. Bobby Labonte will probably do a really good job giving the command. It's been a big year for the sport, and I think Bobby Labonte will do a great job. Pretty excited to see that he'll be given the command for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. As it was announced earlier this evening that Garrett Smithley will drive the 45 for Alpha Prime Racing once again this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Garrett Smithley's made 2 starts so far with Alpha Prime Racing. He ran last weekend, of course, at the previous race at Darlington. Didn't have the greatest run overall. Garrett, I think, is a decent race car driver, but is not a driver that's going to set the world on fire for you. That being said, I think he could have a solid and good run this weekend. I hope he can, because this is technically a super speedway race. Hope you guys can move around so we can see some passing, and hopefully we can see Garrett Smithley have a strong and solid performance this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway with Alpha Prime Racing. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As it was reported by Jay Fry, who's the president of IndyCar, that he says a new chassis is finally in the works for IndyCar. IndyCar has been using the same chassis since 2012, which is why they call it the DW12. There's been a lot of people like myself that have been saying for a long time that they absolutely need to change the IndyCar chassis. It's been 12 years since we've been using it. We've been adding a lot of weight, and while I feel like the short track racing definitely has improved the last couple of weeks, the road course racing, I think, suffered because you need an opportunity to pass these cars. These cars are really close on speed in IndyCar, and it's very, very difficult to pass. So the easiest thing that IndyCar can do is figure out a new chassis. There's been rumors that it could come in 2026, but everything keeps getting pushed back till 2027. So I think the earliest we could get a new chassis is 2027. And if that's the case, it is going to be 15 years with the same chassis. Ouch. That is a very, very long time. So I really hope they can get it out very soon and get it out quickly so we can have a new chassis in IndyCar in the not-so-distant future, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Bleacher Report. As it was reported by basically the Reddit account for NASCAR that the Bleacher Report has officially created a motorsports account on Instagram. The Bleacher Report is one of the biggest accounts, not just on Instagram, but also Twitter as well. It's part of HBO and TNT and True TV. And it's huge to see that they're making an account for motorsports. And I think it's going to be able to bring a lot of the younger audiences in. That's what the goal is for TNT and what NASCAR needs to be doing. They need to be finding a way to attract a younger audience. NASCAR, of course, has a much older audience than a younger audience, and the easiest way for the sport to grow long term is finding a way to attract that younger audience. So if they can find a way to do that and having a Bleacher Report account to do that with motorsports especially, that could really help attract a lot of younger fans. We've seen some of the Bleacher Report posts, especially with the finish at Atlanta. That post, I think, got like 100,000 likes on Instagram, if I remember correctly. So having a company like that to support NASCAR is very huge. It shows that TNT is taking the sport very seriously, and they're making a lot of big moves to really help grow the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. As it was confirmed earlier today that Junior Motorsports will be scrapping crew chiefs for the remainder of this season. So Adam Wall, who has been the crew chief of Sammy Smith throughout 2024, will move over to work with Brandon Jones for the remainder of this year. Meanwhile, Phil Bell, who's been the crew chief for Brandon Jones this season, will be moving over to work with Sammy Smith. This is a very interesting move, but both these cars have generally struggled throughout the 2024 season. Both Sammy Smith and Brandon Jones, I think actually Sammy Smith moved back above the regular season, but he's been struggling in that car. I think we all kind of expected Sammy Smith to perform a lot better with Junior Motorsports this year, and it just really hasn't worked out for Sammy Smith. Same with Brandon Jones. I expected Brandon Jones going into this year to make the playoffs with Junior Motorsports, because last year he really struggled, and they made the crew chief change after they lost Jason Burdett, and it just really didn't work out. I'm hoping with this mid-season crew chief change that we can see a lot of success for both drivers for the remainder of the year, considering one of these drivers who we'll talk about later in this episode won't even be back with this organization in 2025. So hopefully they can find a success that they're looking for going forward, and they can end the year on a very high note. Hope it ends up happening, and both drivers had a lot of success for the remainder of the 2024 season, and they can have success for where they're going to in 2025, to be honest with you. Now we're going ahead jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about TNT. As it was reported by Jordan Bianchi and Jeff Gluck on The Athletic on the teardown after the NASCAR Cup Series race on Sunday evening that TNT will be doing an Inside NASCAR show starting this Thursday on September 5th. It is basically going to be like inside the NBA, inside the NFL, and also inside the NHL as well. It is going to feature Shannon Spake, Jordan Bianchi, Mamba Smith, and Steve Letarte. It also was confirmed that Kyle Busch will be on the first few episodes. They have not confirmed the other drivers that will be part of this show. This is a very interesting roundtable of people. You have Shannon Spake, who's been a host of Fox for the last couple years, really since 2017. She became the host of Race Hub. Unfortunately, we know Race Hub is no longer around, and there's been a lot of speculation. I believe it's been pretty much confirmed that Shannon Spake is no longer at Fox going forward. If she's been hired by TNT and True TV and those companies to work with, I think that's a really good pickup and a great decision. Shannon Spake has done a fantastic job over there. Jordan Bianchi, who's going to be writing a lot of analysis. I don't agree always with his opinions, but Jordan Bianchi is one of the best out there when it comes to breaking news and reporting news in this industry. So Jordan is a good pickup. Mamba Smith is going to be your hype man. He's the guy who's going to be supporting NASCAR no matter what. He's been defending the playoffs as of recently, which I really don't agree with Mamba Smith on, but Mamba Smith does have a lot of energy. And then you have Steve Letarte. He's going to be your crew chief that's going to provide a lot of analysis as well. Steve Letarte has been rumored to be going both to Amazon and TNT next year as well, so this would not shock me or surprise me. I think having an Inside NASCAR show is huge, and this is pretty much going to be the replacement for Race Hub for 2024, and I would have to imagine that this is something that will continue in 2025 as well. Having shows like this, yes, it is going to be on True TV, but having shows like this could really help grow the sport in a major and massive way, and I really hope it can grow NASCAR in a big way as well. We've seen inside the NBA grow the sport. We've seen inside the NHL grow that sport. I think having a show like this and maybe getting Charles Barkley and Shaq and all those people that work there there would be pretty awesome to see, and maybe finding a way to get Dale Jr. to be on the show would be great as well, considering he will be going to TNT next year. So I think this is a really good pairing for sure, and pretty exciting nonetheless to see that TNT will be doing an Inside NASCAR show starting in 2024 for the playoffs, which will be coming out tomorrow. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chris Buescher. Now, there have been a lot of talk about what happened at Darlington with Chris Buescher. So with about 40 laps to go in the NASCAR Cup Series race, the Southern 500, Chris Buescher was battling Todd Gilliland very hard for about 10th or 11th position, I believe, on the racetrack. And going down the back straightaway, Todd Gilliland had put Chris Buescher a little bit into the outside wall. It looked like Chris Buescher had come down the racetrack to intentionally wreck Todd Gilliland down the back straightaway. But when you look at the in-car camera and reports and stuff, it looked like Chris Buescher was just trying to keep his car in control and was losing control. Now, there have been some talk and speculation that NASCAR might penalize Chris Buescher, but Eldon Sawyer confirmed on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio earlier today that Chris Buescher will not be penalized for the run-in at Darlington with Todd Gilliland. I think this is the right call in all honesty, in all seriousness. I know that Chris Buescher was probably frustrated and upset, considering when you go back to Darlington in the spring, when Todd Reddick put Chris Buescher in the outside wall, he was probably a little bit frustrated what happened there. But at the same time, I don't think what Chris Buescher did was intentional to Todd Gilliland. I think it actually was accidental. I think he was just trying to control his car, and while he probably was upset and frustrated with Todd Gilliland in that situation, I do think NASCAR is making the right call. Now, obviously, rivaling somebody down the straightaway is unacceptable. If he had done it intentionally, then yeah, you penalize him, and probably would have kicked out his playoff eligibility at that point. But at the same time, which by the way, Chris Buescher still did not make the playoffs this year. But I feel like with Chris Buescher, I don't think he personally did it intentionally. I thought originally he did, but when I looked at the replay, he was out of control. The car was really sideways. The car was all over the place, and it was getting very loose. So in my opinion, I think NASCAR did make the right call here. I think they should not penalize him. I'm glad to see they aren't penalizing him. So I feel like that, especially with Austin Dillon stuff, Austin was probably like, well, why did I get penalized? Well, dude, you right-reared him at Denny Hamlin at Richmond, so that's why you got penalized, and he probably should have been suspended. Nonetheless, I think NASCAR did make the right decision and right call when it comes to this, and I'm very happy and glad to see that they will not be suspending Chris Buescher for his actions at Darlington this past weekend. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rajah Caruth. Now we're going to talk about Brandon Jones going over to Joe Gibbs Racing near the end of this episode. But one person that asked a question was about Rajah Caruth, and could Rajah Caruth be a candidate to join Junior Motorsports in 2025? Well, Bob Pockers answered this person's question by saying that he does expect that Rajah Caruth will be back in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series once again in 2025. Now, I heard a little bit of a rumor earlier this year that Hendrick was looking to run a full-time program for next year in Xfinity, but it sounds like that is not going to happen. That being said, there is a chance we could see Rajah make some select Xfinity Series starts maybe by the end of this year, considering they did let him run at Phoenix at the end of the year last year. But Rajah has, in my opinion, improved a lot in the Truck Series. That being said, I don't think he's fully ready at this point to move up full-time with Junior Motorsports in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now, where could Rajah end up driving next year if he stays in trucks? I would expect more than likely he'll be back in the number 71 truck once again with Spire. I think one more year in the Truck Series would really fill Rajah. Rajah's still a really tough young driver. We've got to remember this. Rajah just turned 22 this year. So he's still got a long time to really build up his career. And the more experience that Rajah can get in the Truck Series, the better driver that I think he's going to be. I think throwing him to the wolves at Junior Motorsports would not be the greatest decision in my opinion. That being said, if you're JRM and if you have an all-star car, that would not be a bad move to put him in part-time. That could be a move that I could definitely see. And I think Rajah being part-time with JRM could definitely happen for sure if they decide to run a fifth all-star car next year. We don't know if that's going to happen at this point. So now the other question is who's actually going to drive the 9 car next year? A lot of people think it's going to be Carson Quaffle. If they can find a sponsorship funding to have Carson Quaffle in that car full-time next year, I think Carson Quaffle will end up being the driver. Carson, in my opinion, deserves to be full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. I did see that Ryan Truex was definitely talked about by Dale Jr., but I imagine Dale Jr. is probably not bringing Ryan Truex in. That's why Mark Truex Jr. is staying at Joe Gibbs Racing as an ambassador next year. So I do think Rajah stays in trucks, and most likely Carson Quaffle is going to get the ride full-time if they can find a sponsorship in funding, which with Dale Jr., they're probably going to be able to find funding from Hellmann's and some other companies like Tire Pros as well, considering I think Tire Pros is still working with Junior Motorsports at this moment. So I do think you'll see Carson Quaffle in that car, and I do think that Rajah Caruth, once again, will be back in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. I would be shocked if he's not back with Spire. I could be wrong, he goes somewhere else, but I do think that Rajah Caruth more than likely will be back driving for Spire Motorsports in the 2025 NASCAR Craftsman Truck season, which I think will do a really good job at that organization, in my honest opinion, in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Pato O'Ward. As it was reported by Jennifer from the Associated Press that NASCAR has inquired on Pato O'Ward's availability for the NASCAR Cup Series Mexico City race. Now, Pato O'Ward, we know, has been in the media in the last week or so, basically complaining about IndyCar not racing in Mexico City in 2025. He was very, very shocked that NASCAR got the date over Mexico City, and we saw some words exchange in the media and basically through internet between Mark Miles and Pato O'Ward this past weekend. Now, this move about Pato O'Ward potentially going over and racing in NASCAR, in my opinion, would be very, very cool. Now, one thing that will hurt this is I believe they've already announced the start times. I could be wrong, but I do believe they've already started start times for IndyCar. Now, the NASCAR Cup race in Mexico City, the time has not been announced at this point, but I have to imagine it is going to be a little bit of a later start time. The problem for IndyCar is that you have the Gateway IndyCar race, and that will be during that same weekend. Now, could IndyCar potentially move the start time of that race back? That could certainly be a possibility. If that was to happen, I think you definitely could see Pato O'Ward racing in the Cup Series race at Mexico City. Now, what team could Pato O'Ward end up driving for if he was to do this? Well, I think the most likely organization is Trackhouse Racing. Justin Marks said about a week or so ago at Daytona International Speedway that he is expected to be bringing back Project 91, despite the fact that Shane Van Gisbergen will be going full-time with Trackhouse Racing next year. We do expect that Project 91 will be making a comeback next year. Now, he did not specifically say how many races it will be back, but I would sure think that Mexico City would be one of the races that definitely would end up being considered. I think it'd be very interesting to see Pato O'Ward come and race in NASCAR. I think Pato O'Ward has expressed racing in NASCAR in the past, and getting the chance and opportunity to drive a next-gen car will be very interesting, considering we heard Kyle Larson say that basically that the next-gen car race is kind of similar to an IndyCar a little bit. He felt very used to racing in the IndyCar at Indy 500 because he got that experience. I know Jennifer had kind of said maybe Kyle Larson should do a double where Larson goes and runs the Gateway IndyCar race while Pato runs out, which I completely disagree. Kyle Larson, in my opinion, should be running the Mexico race. I really hope this does end up happening. It will depend on if there is a chance the IndyCar race can happen at a later time. Also, I think for the drivers that want to go race the Le Mans next year, because remember, that's the same weekend of Le Mans 24 hours next year, and maybe some Cup guys can go do that as well. But I have to imagine that Pato O'Ward coming and racing the Mexico race would be absolutely huge. And he would join an elite list of drivers who've gotten a chance and opportunity to run in the next-gen car. Shane Van Gisbergen, who's going to be full-time in Cup next year. Juan Pablo Montoya, who's going to be running a Watkins Glen next weekend. We've seen Jimmy Johnson come out of retirement and run. Ryan Newman come out of retirement and run. Greg Biffle come out of retirement. Carl Edwards at one point had expressed interest in coming back and driving a next-gen car. We've seen Joey Hand drive the 60 RFK car. We've seen Kimi Räikkönen come and race. And Jordan Taylor and Cam Waters and Will Brown have all come out and raced from the supercar world. And Brody Kosecki as well. We've seen a lot of drivers from a lot of different backgrounds get the chance and opportunity to drive this next-gen car, and Pato O'Ward getting the chance and opportunity to drive the next-gen car would be absolutely amazing. Do I think it's going to happen? We'll just have to wait and see, but the fact that NASCAR is trying to find a way to get Pato O'Ward to run in Mexico City, I think it would be absolutely huge for it to happen. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, and we'll see if Pato O'Ward truly gets to race in Mexico City in 2025. Going to be very interesting to see what happens there. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the first of three major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about another charter agreement update. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern earlier today that NASCAR is hoping to reach an agreement on a new governing charter system with its Premier Series teams this week to avoid having to talk about the charter agreement throughout the playoffs. They're hoping to have it done by the end of this week. Now, it continued on, Adam Stern had reported that one of the new clauses that is a part of this thing is an anti-disparagement clause. If you saw this past weekend at Darlington before the Southern 500 took place, we saw Jordan Bianchi and Bob Poggers put photos of Curtis Polk wearing on the back of his shirt. Basically, please do not ask me about my charter. I don't want NASCAR to disparage that. What do we mean by disparagement? Well, it means disparagement kind of means a way of criticizing it. Now, is this going to be criticism of NASCAR altogether where you can't criticize the sport? Or is it going to be criticism of the charter system? Because if it's criticism of the charter system, it would make a little bit of sense, but I also wouldn't 100% agree with it. If it's to get rid of free speech altogether in NASCAR, I would not be the biggest fan of this move. I think drivers and teams should be allowed to criticize NASCAR on some of the things that NASCAR has done, especially with the next-gen car, where the drivers have been outspoken about the issues of the next-gen car. I feel like drivers should be outspoken on that. Now, continuing on the article, it sounds like there are some organizations that are actually ready to sign this charter agreement and are ready to get this done, while there's some other teams, mostly 2311, that sound like they're not interested in signing the charter and they're still waiting for it. Now, here's the thing that does need to be noted. Not all the teams have to agree. In fact, it sounds like not every single team is going to sign a charter agreement at the same time. We could see other teams try to negotiate better deals for themselves so they can find a way to get a better deal. Maybe like 2311 getting the charters permanent. It sounds like, according to Adam Stern, it sounds like the teams have agreed to a revenue split for the TV deal, which at least that's a positive. And in fact, we're starting to hear a little more positive in a sense, and it sounds like there's some teams that are just ready to get this charter agreement signed. And in fact, you had Front Row Motorsports get a charter and Stewart-Haas Racing sell their charter off to Trackhouse Racing and Trackhouse buying it, and Justin Marks pretty much not worrying about the charter agreement. It tells me that a lot of teams are ready to get this deal done. And like I said, only one team has to sign the charter agreement, and then the charter agreement is basically there. Not all the teams have to agree with it. I do agree that permanent charters being a sport would be a great decision, but I don't know if NASCAR is going to let that happen. There's also talk, of course, about like revenue stakes coming in among other things and new governing things, and also teams wanting a more of a authority on decisions NASCAR makes when it comes to rules, which I agree. I think the teams should be allowed to have a little bit of a say when it comes to that. I'm just hoping at this point with this charter agreement, because we keep talking about this so much, I really hope we can get this charter agreement done. We are now in the first week of September, and in fact, we're still talking about this kind of stuff. It's definitely a little bit frustrating. But at the same time, I understand that both sides want their own thing. And I know that Steve Fell said this as well, that this is something we need to be paying attention to, which Denny Hamlin will agree with him on that, but they don't agree on everything eye to eye. I think if permanent charters became a thing for teams like 2311 Racing and Michael Jordan and those guys and Trackhouse, I think a lot more teams would definitely be happy. Are we going to see charters become permanent? I don't know at this point, but I really hope we do get this done because it sounds like it's going to be 7 years with an extra 7 years. So if it's a 14-year deal and they can change it a little bit, honestly, I would just sign that deal because you don't have to negotiate then for another 14 years. It'll be 2035 by that point, which would be about the 88th or 89th year of the sport. So it's a long time away at that point. So I do think they're going to get it done in the future. I hope we get it done soon. Actually, 2038, excuse me. So it'll be a very long time. I hope they get it done soon so the sport can survive long term. If they don't get it done, we could see a lockout. And honestly, it would be a bad day if a lockout came into play. I hope we don't get a lockout in NASCAR, but it could happen if a charter agreement is now finalized in the near future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about Brandon Jones. As it was announced earlier today that Brandon Jones will officially be headed back to Joe Gibbs Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025. And according to the announcement, it is a multi-year deal. There's been rumors and speculation over the last month or so from multiple different reports that Brandon Jones was going to be leaving Junior Motorsports at the end of the 2024 season and be headed back to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. This is the first JGR driver that has been signed for the next year. Last year it took a very long time for Joe Gibbs Racing to announce their full-time driver lineup. They, of course, announced in 2024, like drivers like Eric Almirola be part of the team, William Swash be part of the team part-time, and drivers like Sheldon Creed, who, of course, will be going to the Haas factory team in 2025, and Chandler Smith, who may not be back at JGR. We'll get to that here in just a second. But Brandon Jones, of course, left Joe Gibbs Racing at the end of 2022 to join Junior Motorsports. And let's be real and honest, it didn't really work out at Junior Motorsports the last couple of years. Brandon Jones actually ran a little better last year than he has done this year. They, of course, changed the crew chief earlier this year, and we all kind of thought maybe a new crew chief change could really help out, considering I believe Phil Butt had worked with Kyle Larson, if I remember correctly, or had been the engineer on one of Kyle Larson's cars. I think we all kind of thought that Brandon Jones was going to run a lot better this year. I thought coming the year he was going to make the playoffs. It's been a massive struggle, and while not everything has been Brandon Jones' fault so far this year, he's just really struggled in 2024. So I'm not entirely shocked or surprised to see this move. Now, that being said, I know a lot of people are going to be questioning this move. Why not put Ryan Truex full-time instead of Brandon Jones? Well, number one, Brandon Jones has a lot of funding and has a lot of money backing him as well. He is sponsored by Menards, and his father is the owner of the Rheem Company. I believe is one of the CEOs of Rheem. That's why Brandon Jones is getting another opportunity at Joe Gibbs Racing. But say what you want to say, Brandon Jones did run a lot better at Joe Gibbs Racing than he's done at Junior Motorsports. He actually competed for a championship in 2022. He made the round of 8 and was only a restart away had Ty Gibbs not jacked up the rear tires of Brandon Jones's. We might have seen Brandon Jones make the championship 4, and he also got a win in 2022 and won multiple races. We all forget in 2020, he should have beat Kyle Busch at Phoenix. And Kyle Busch was still pretty elite in 2020. Kyle Busch is still elite now, but Kyle Busch was still very good in 2020, and we all thought Kyle Busch was going to be a championship threat and contender in the Cup Series that year. So Brandon Jones is not a bad driver, and I think going back over to Joe Gibbs Racing is honestly not a bad career choice for him. Now, what do I expect from Brandon Jones? I don't know if Brandon Jones is going to win, but I do think he'll run a lot better. I do think he will more than likely make the playoffs with JGR because they are a better team at the moment than Junior Motorsports, so I feel like JRM has improved a little bit, but I do think that you'll see him do pretty well over there in 2025. Now, the other big question is who else is going to be at Joe Gibbs Racing next year? We do think that Taylor Gray, who currently drives for Tricon Garage in the Truck Series, we do think he is going over to Joe Gibbs Racing full-time. He's been getting prepared because they're going to be running, I believe, Seb Chaka as a crew chief in the 19 car. We do think Taylor Gray's in the car this weekend, so we do expect that he'll be full-time next year. Taylor's been really good in the Truck Series this year, and also in his select Xfinity starts, he's been pretty good too. So I think Taylor Gray will be there. And then finally, the other driver we've been hearing is William Sawalage. This is a no-brainer. There's been rumors about him going full-time with Joe Gibbs Racing next year. He turns 18 in October, will make his Xfinity Series debut at Homestead Miami Speedway later this year, so next month, because he'll turn 18 in October. So we do think he will be going also full-time with the team in 2025. Now, for those wondering about Ryan Truex, I do think Ryan Truex will be part-time with Joe Gibbs Racing, but I do agree with a lot of people he should be full-time. There's also going to be an all-star car most likely next year. I do think Martin Truex Jr. will be there. In fact, Martin Truex Jr. did confirm in the media that he'll be driving Rockingham. We do think Ryan will be behind that car. Christopher Bell, Chase Briscoe probably, maybe even Bubba Wallace could get behind the wheel. And if Eric Almirola is cleared to come back with JGR, I do think he'll be behind the wheel of that car as well. Other drivers and moves that could be happening soon. The other question is who gets the 9 car next year. Like I mentioned a little earlier, I do think it's going to be Carson Quaffle. I think Carson Quaffle is ready to go full-time with Junior Motorsports. I think he'll do very well with JRM in the 2025 season. If he does truly go there, he's been very good. Corey Day's been rumored as well, maybe making some trucks in Xfinity Series starts, but I do think he'll be at least be in the Truck Series part-time by the end of this year. The other big question is what happens with the rest of the silly season. We already know, of course, that Sheldon Creed and Sam Mayer going to the Haas factory team in 2025. We don't know where Haley Deegan's going at this point. We also know that Daniel Dye, Josh Williams, and Christian Eckes have all been confirmed the last week or so. They'll all be in the lineup for calling. There's also a chance that Shane Van Gisbergen also could be part-time with Junior Motorsports if they don't find a full-time driver. I also do think there's some other drivers that haven't been announced at this point and some lower tier teams that are going to be making some pretty big moves. There's also rumors about Corey LaJoie as well, but I think LaJoie is going to be back in the Truck Series next year. But I do think bringing Brandon Jones back into the JGR pipeline does make a lot of sense. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if Brandon Jones can perform well. But he, of course, will be going back to JGR in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Alex Bowman. Now, if you've been on social media over the past day or so, there has been a wild rumor that has been circulating surrounding Alex Bowman. Now, Bray Carter, fellow YouTuber, put up this clip on YouTube that comes from the most recent episode of Door Bumper Clear. Now, of course, the people on Door Bumper Clear were doing their playoff predictions for 2024. And when they went to the round of 16, they mentioned Alex Bowman. It is mentioned that if Alex Bowman doesn't make it past the round of 16, they say that Alex Bowman may be out not just at a round of 16, but maybe out of his ride at the end of this year. And they also say that's why there hasn't been a driver announced for the 7 yet for 2025. Now, this is a rumor that I've not just heard from Dirty Mo Media or Door Bumper Clear. I've seen this rumor a couple times on social media about Alex Bowman being out of Hendrick Motorsports at the end of this year. If this rumor is true at all, that Alex Bowman is out of Hendrick Motorsports at the end of 2024, then this will continue to be one of the craziest, silly seasons that I have seen in a very long time. You, of course, have Michael McDowell leave front row to go to Spire Motorsports. You have Stewart-Haas Racing shut down at the end of the year. You've got Haas Factory Team coming back. You've got rumors of RFK Racing potentially opening up a third charter. You've obviously had rumors at one point of how Haley Deegan going to Haas Factory. You've got rumors about Riley Herbst going to 2311. You've had rumors about other drivers coming back and other big moves happening. And now you've got other rumors about Kyle Busch leaving RCR at the end of the year, and we'll get to that in just a second. But Alex Bowman out of Hendrick Motorsports, that will be very interesting. Now, I do want to make clear that Alex Bowman is a very solid race car driver. Has he been the worst performing Hendrick driver so far in 2024? Yes. But that's like saying that Alex Bowman is bad. He is not a bad driver. We all forget that 2021, Alex Bowman scored 4 wins. Yes, he got eliminated in the round of 12, but he scored 4 wins that year. And in 2022, before the injury at Texas, the concussion, he was one of the most consistent drivers the whole entire season. And in 2023, while he struggled, he still had a couple bright spots. And this year, while he's not led a lot of laps so far, Alex Bowman has been a solid driver at Hendrick Motorsports for a very, very long time. Now, that being said, contracts can easily be broken. Just ask Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie had a contract through 2025 with Spire Motorsports, and then they broke it up. Now, that being said, we know that Ally is a big fan of Alex Bowman, but Rick Hendrick has a lot of money backing him. And remember, Ally used to be GMAC, which has had a big association with Hendrick Motorsports for many, many years. They sponsored Brian Vickers back in the day and also sponsored Casey Mears as well. Alex Bowman, in my opinion, is a good driver. He made the playoffs this year, and if he goes far in the playoffs, I don't really see him losing his ride. But let's just hypothetically say that Alex Bowman does lose his ride at the end of the year. Who could be his replacement? Could it be someone like a Kyle Busch? There's a weird rumor going around about Kyle Busch maybe going back to 2311 or going to 2311 Racing. I did see that, but I've seen some people saying Kyle Busch could find a way over at Hendrick Motorsports. While I think Kyle Busch and Hendrick would be a really great move, I'm not sure Kyle Busch is going to do better than Alex Bowman, but Kyle Busch going back to Hendrick would be a really interesting way to end his career. Maybe Bubba Wallace. There was one point in 2020 where Bubba Wallace was rumored to go to the 40A car, but Bubba Wallace, I do think, is going to sign a multi-year contract extension with 2311, and I feel like that's going to be announced here very, very soon. The driver that is most likely going to end up in this 40A car, if the rumor ends up coming true, is Justin Haley. Hendrick Motorsports, from what I have heard, is reportedly a major, major fan of Justin Haley, and they have been very impressed with what Justin Haley's been doing at Rickwood Racing. Now, we know that Justin Haley has said publicly that he would love to stay with the RFK Racing Group, but Brad Keselowski's not retiring anytime soon. And I feel like if you've got an opportunity to, let's say, go to Spire Motorsports or be part of Hendrick Motorsports, where you're going to have a better chance and opportunity to be competitive, you probably take that chance and opportunity. I think that would be a very, very good move. Now, if Alex Bowman doesn't end up there at Hendrick Motorsports next year somehow, Where does he go in 2025? I think he goes to the 7 car for Spire. The 7 car would be a really good move. I know some would say it would be a bad move, but you have to remember, Spire Motorsports is an ascending organization. They have an association with Hendrick Motorsports. That's why there's rumors about Justin Haley going over to the team next year, that being Spire. But also Rodney Childers is going to be over there next year, and Travis Peterson is going to be there as well. We have seen Rodney Childers take drivers who aren't the greatest in the world and perform exceptionally well. And I think him working with Alex Bowman, who in my opinion is a very solid race car driver, I would see that 7 car competing for a playoff spot. I legit think they could, because they've had playoff speed at times this year. And while Corey LaJoie struggled in that car, I think Alex Bowman is an all-around much better race car driver. So if this does end up happening and we see Alex Bowman somehow find his way over Spire Motorsports, that would absolutely be wild. Now, do I 100% think it's going to happen? I'm going to give this rumor about 20 to 25% currently at the moment. But the fact we're hearing more and more chatter about this tells me there's some legs to this rumor. Again, it's still unknown at this point if it is going to happen, but it just continues all the wild rumors. And like I mentioned a second ago, there's this thing I saw on Reddit earlier today about Kyle Busch maybe going to 2311. We know his brother Kurt works over there, and I was one of the teams that was interested in Kyle Busch's services for 2023 when Kyle, of course, left Joe Gibbs Racing, and Denny Hamlin is good friends with Kyle. So obviously those two working together would make a lot of sense. But I do think, especially with the speed that RCR has shown, especially recently, I don't see Kyle Busch leaving RCR at least for one more year. If RCR struggles again, though, next year, I could see Kyle Busch leaving and going to 2311 perhaps. I think that would be a really good move for his career, because Kyle Busch has been rejuvenated. He's had 4 straight top 12 finishes, 3 finishes straight inside the top 5. I think Kyle Busch would be great there. But going back to Alex Bowman, there's been a lot of silly season rumblings and rumors, and this season continues to be one of the craziest silly seasons that I can remember in a long time. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens in regards to the silly season move, and we'll see if Alex Bowman truly ends up leaving Hendrick at the end of the year and going to Spire. But I don't know if he's going to leave. I would not be surprised, though, if it happens. It could shock me, and we could see Alex Bowman somehow find a way over at a team like that in 2025. So, that is today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support on Patreon as well. Let's get some more of that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. Do you think Alex Bowman will stay with Hendrick next year, or do you think he will somehow find a way out of Hendrick? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Brandon Jones going back to JGR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later this morning, more likely on the channel, you're going to see the race picks for the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Atlanta. And then tomorrow, you'll see race picks for the Quaker State 400, and most likely a paint scheme video for the Quaker State 400. Friday, most likely to see a NASCAR news video on the channel. And this weekend, we've got race coverage. We got a couple Shane Van Gisbergen videos dropping this weekend. We also might have a silly season update, maybe Haley Deegan video dropping very soon as well. Got a lot of great content dropping that I cannot wait for you guys to check out. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.